My own daughter threw me out of her house just like that from one moment to the next, and she said it without her voice even trembling. "Dad, you're a burden. We don't want you living here anymore." Just like that, with words you wouldn't even say to a stranger on the street. I was sitting at the table, my cold coffee between my hands, when I heard that come out of her mouth. Megan, my youngest daughter, the one I had raised with so much effort, was now looking at me as if I were in the way. And the worst part wasn't what she said. The worst part was the silence that followed, that emptiness in the air, where you understand there's no going back. I stayed there quiet, looking at the floral tablecloth that was always on that table, remembering the times when that house was filled with laughter, with grandchildren running around. And now they were asking me to leave, like you get rid of an old piece of furniture. "It's me talking to you, son. I'm Ernest, born and raised in the Rust Belt. I've got 78 years of life on my shoulders, many of them spent among the iron and grease of an auto repair shop. I dedicated my whole life to honest work, to the sweat of my brow, so that my 3 children would always have a plate of food on the table and shoes without holes. When I was young, I was strong. I'd work up to 16 hours straight if I had to. My wife, may she rest in peace, always waited for me with a hot meal. And although life was never easy, we never lacked for what we needed. After she passed, I was left alone, and Megan offered to have me live with her. And I, with a heavy heart, accepted. You think you're doing the right thing, that this is how you take care of family. But the years take their toll, and it seems the older you get, the more you get in the way. Ever since I moved in with Megan and her husband, I started to notice the looks, the passing comments that I left the water running, that I used too much gas, that my pension barely covered my own expenses. I kept quiet, because when you've got gray hair, you learn to stay silent. Until that day came, the day I'm telling you about. They told me they couldn't take it anymore, that they had talked it over, and they handed me a piece of paper with an address written on it, a nursing home, St. Joseph's Home. They didn't even give me a choice. They had already decided everything. But what Megan didn't know was that I wasn't as naive as she thought. For years I had kept a secret. While everyone believed I was living solely on my pension, I had been saving money in a separate account, using my late brother's name so no one would know. Little by little, what I earned from odd jobs, what I saved from not buying new clothes, I put it all away. Because even when you're old, you have to have a plan B, not for luxuries, but for dignity. I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my gray jacket, the same one I'd worn for years, for special occasions, put my wallet in my pocket, and walked out the door with my head held high. Megan didn't hug me, she didn't even look at me. She just stood there, looking the other way. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of my own steps, the cold seeping into my bones, but with a firm resolve in my heart. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Because you know what? You can lose your house, you can lose the love of your children. But as long as you have dignity and a little bit of sense, you're never truly alone. I went straight to the bank. I withdrew just enough from that secret account to start over. Not a lot, don't think I'm a millionaire, but enough to not depend on anyone. And as I counted the bills there at the teller's window, I thought of Megan. About how one day when she least expected it, she would discover the truth. That the old man she had kicked out of her house wasn't a burden. He was the same man who was always one step ahead, even if nobody noticed. I walked without rushing, my jacket buttoned to my neck, feeling the dry afternoon wind. I wasn't carrying any suitcases, no bags, not even an umbrella in case it rained. Just the sound of my footsteps and the weight of the words I had left behind in that house. And as I walked down the main avenue of the neighborhood, I remembered so many times I had walked there with Megan as a little girl, holding her hand to buy ice cream. Now I was walking alone, but with something she knew nothing about. In the inside pocket of my jacket, besides the card for the secret account, I carried the deed to a property I had bought years ago, far from the city, in one of those small towns that few people remember. It was a simple cottage, one I had fixed up little by little on my days off, without telling a soul. Why? Because I always knew that one day life could take this kind of turn. And that day had arrived. I didn't stop to look in shop windows or to greet acquaintances. I went straight to the bus terminal. There, with the last rays of sun streaming through the large window, I bought a ticket for the next trip to that town. The boy at the ticket counter asked if I had any luggage. I told him no, just what I was wearing. He gave me a strange look, but I didn't say anything else. I sat on a wooden bench to wait for the bus, watching families say their goodbyes. Hugs, kisses, laughter. And me there alone. But let me tell you something. I preferred that dignified loneliness to staying in a place where I was seen as a burden. The trip took a couple of hours. The bus engine hummed softly, and as I looked out the window, the city lights faded behind me, giving way to open fields, hills outlined against the orange sky. I remembered my wife Lucy then, and how she always used to tell me, "Ernest, you have to plant your seeds where you know you'll have a harvest, even if others don't understand." She never knew about the little house either, but I'm sure she would have approved. When we finally arrived, it was already dark. The town was quiet. You could only hear crickets and a dog barking in the distance. I got off calmly, giving the driver a nod, and walked down the cobblestone street until I reached that wooden door I knew so well. It was a simple house, yes, a single story with small windows, a roof a little worn by time, but it was mine. And even though I hadn't been there in months, the key still worked in the lock. When I stepped inside, the smell of old wood filled my chest with nostalgia. I turned on the light, and there everything was just as I had left it. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a cot in the corner, and a small altar with an image of St. Jude, whom I'd always had faith in. I locked the door, sat in one of the chairs, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. There were no more voices telling me I was a burden, no more tired looks or sighs behind my back, just silence and the certainty that I could still stand on my own 2 feet. That night, I slept on the cot with my jacket folded at my feet like a blanket. The mattress was a bit hard, but I didn't care. I've slept in worse places. And as I closed my eyes, I thought about Megan, wondering if she was feeling any remorse or if she had simply gone on with her life without a second thought. I don't fool myself, son. You learn not to expect anything from others, but it still hurts. The next day early, I got up, washed my face with cold water from the outdoor sink, and went straight to the town bank. I needed to withdraw a little money to buy food, a new stove, some basic things. I walked in with a firm step, greeting the guard, and when I handed my card to the teller, the young woman who helped me raised her eyebrows. It wasn't common to see a balance like mine in such a small town. I just smiled at her without saying a word. It's not that I was rich, but there was enough. Enough to live peacefully without depending on anyone. After doing my shopping, I returned to the house with a bag of bread, a package of beans coffee, and a small battery-powered radio. Because silence is fine, but every now and then you need to hear a voice, even if it's just an announcer talking about the weather. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, dusting furniture, opening the windows to let in the fresh air. And as I swept the floor, I thought about all the times I had imagined this moment. Because believe me, it's not that you want to live alone. It's not that you wish to be apart from your family. But there comes a point when you have to choose between begging for affection or living with dignity, even if it's with a little less company. It was late in the afternoon, with the sun painting the walls red when the phone rang. It surprised me because the phone in that house rarely rang. I answered calmly, and to my surprise, it was Megan. Her voice sounded different, quieter, as if it was hard for her to speak. She asked me where I was. I told her it didn't matter, that I was fine, that she shouldn't worry. And then after a long silence, she said something I didn't expect. "Dad, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that to you. I shouldn't have kicked you out." Her voice was breaking. She asked me to come back, that her husband no longer agreed with what she had done, that she regretted it. But I just told her it was okay, that I forgave her, but that I wasn't coming back, that we each had to go our own way. She insisted, almost crying. And in that moment I knew my secret was working, that my absence had weighed more heavily than they thought. But I didn't say anything about the account, or the house, or anything. I just hung up, slowly looking out the window as night fell. Because there are some things, son, that you have to keep to yourself. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect. And that's how the second day of my new life ended. Alone, yes, but peaceful, with a hot coffee on the table, the radio playing softly, and a heart that ached just a little bit less. Let me tell you, son, that night after hanging up the phone, I sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the empty street. The town had that silence of forgotten places where time seems to walk more slowly. The streetlights flickered, and the air smelled of fresh earth. And there, with the coffee I had made for myself, I thought, life is funny, isn't it? That you can go from having a house full of family, with grandchildren running and noise everywhere, to being alone, barely hearing the murmur of a battery-powered radio. But I'll tell you something. It wasn't the loneliness itself that hurt so much, but the fact of knowing that to my own daughter I had stopped being important, that they only looked for me when it was convenient. The next day, early, I decided I wasn't going to stay cooped up. I've always been a man who works with his hands, who moves, who doesn't just sit around waiting for life to pass by. So I grabbed an old tool bag I had kept in the closet, went out and headed straight for the town's hardware store. I greeted the owner, Mr. Chesson Peterson, an old acquaintance from when I used to come by to do repairs. I asked him if he needed help with anything, even if it was just organizing nails or fixing locks. And he, looking me up and down, chuckled softly and said, "Ernest, I thought you had retired." I replied that you never really retire, that as long as your hands work, you have to use them. That's how I started to fill my days. In the mornings, I'd help at the hardware store, fixing things, doing a little painting, carrying sacks if needed. In the afternoons, I'd go back home, make myself a simple meal, and sit on the porch with my radio and an old notebook where I'd write down things that came to mind. Reflections, memories, things I had learned over the years. Not for anyone to read, but for myself, so I wouldn't forget who I was. And in those quiet afternoons, watching the sun hide behind the hills, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But of course, life doesn't leave things alone for long. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, while I was sweeping the patio, I heard a car pull up to the gate. I looked out. And I won't lie to you. My heart skipped a beat. It was Megan's car, and it was her getting out of the driver's seat with her eyes red as if she'd been crying the whole way. She wasn't carrying suitcases or gifts or anything. Just herself standing there looking at the house as if seeing it for the first time. I opened the gate slowly, without a word. She stood still, clutching her purse. And when she finally spoke, it was in a whisper, "Dad, can we talk?" I just nodded and let her in. She sat in the same wooden chair where I used to listen to the radio. I sat across from her, resting my hands on the table. And there, with a broken voice, she began to tell me everything. That since I had left the house felt empty. That her husband had changed. That he wasn't the same. that things between them were tense, that she felt guilty every night remembering what she had said to me, and then lowering her head she said what I least expected to hear. "Dad, I didn't know you had all this. The account, the house, I thought you depended on me." That's when I knew she had discovered my secret. Don't ask me how. Maybe she looked for me at the bank, or maybe an acquaintance from town mentioned it to her. The point is she knew, and that son that had made her understand her mistake. Because people sometimes only value what they have when they lose it. And I, in that moment, looked at her calmly, without resentment. And I told her something I had been wanting to say for days. "Megan, a person's worth isn't in their wallet, or whether they have a house or money saved up. A person is worth what they are. And even if I had nothing, I didn't deserve to be kicked out like that." She cried. She really cried, her face in her hands, like when she was a little girl and would fall while playing. And I, even though it hurt me, couldn't hold on to resentment. Because a father's heart is like that son. It endures a lot. I told her I forgave her, that I held no hatred. But I also made it clear that I had already chosen my path, that I wasn't going back to her house, that I had my own place now. My quiet life, and that's how it was going to stay. We stayed there for a good while without saying much more. Just the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind, and the sun that was beginning to set again. And as I looked at her, I thought about everything that had happened, about how everything had changed in such a short time, from being thrown out of my own home to being there in my own home with my head held high. And I'll tell you something, son. That's the lesson I want you to remember. It doesn't matter how many times life closes a door on you. You can always open another one. You can always start over. After that afternoon, when Megan sat across from me with red eyes and a broken heart, several days passed without us speaking again. She didn't call, she didn't show up in town again. And I, to be honest, didn't look for her either. Because there are times when you have to let things settle on their own without forcing, without pushing. I continued with my routine. I'd get up early, go to the hardware store to give Mr. Peterson a hand, come back home in the afternoons, write a little in my notebook, and listen to the radio while I made a simple dinner. Life in its silence was healing the wounds. Because yes, son, words hurt. But time always knows how to quiet them down. One of those mornings, just as I was leaving the hardware store, I ran into Mr. Miller, the owner of the town bank. A serious man with a gray mustache and a hat that was always perfectly placed. He greeted me respectfully. And after asking about my health, he told me something that left me thinking. He said, "Mr. Ernest, a young lady came by the branch asking for you. She wanted to know if you still had the account active." I didn't say anything, I just nodded. I knew right then it was Megan. Maybe she wanted to make sure what she had discovered was true, or maybe she was looking for a way to get closer again. But it didn't bother me. I understood that everyone needs their own time to process things. That same afternoon, sitting on the porch with my coffee, I saw a car pull up in front of the house again. But this time, it wasn't Megan's. It was a big black car, the kind you notice from a distance. A young, well-dressed man got out with a white shirt and slacks, and he approached the gate with a determined stride. He greeted me respectfully and introduced himself. He was a lawyer sent by a notary from the city. He was here to deliver some papers. At first I thought he had made a mistake, that they couldn't be for me, but no. He had my full name on the folder. I sat at my usual table while he explained that it was about a matter related to an old investment I had made more than 20 years ago. It turns out that a piece of land I had bought on the outskirts with my savings from when I was young had been sold by the government to expand the highway, and since the deed was still in my name, I was now entitled to compensation. It was no small thing. It was a considerable sum, something that left me thinking all night. And there, son, I'm going to be honest with you. I had a moment of doubt, because with that money I could do whatever I wanted. Buy a bigger house, travel, change my life. But that wasn't what I wanted. I had already learned that material things come and go. What really mattered to me at that moment was closing the circle with my daughter. So the next day I grabbed my papers, put what I needed in a bag, and went back to the city. Arriving back in the neighborhood where I had lived with Megan felt strange. I walked slowly through the streets, greeting the neighbors who still recognized me until I was standing in front of the house. I stood there for a moment, looking at the facade, the closed windows, the gate painted blue. I rang the bell, and after a moment, she came out with a look of surprise, but also relief. She didn't say anything, just opened the door and let me in. We sat again at the same table where months before she had told me I was a burden. This time she was the one who poured the coffee, and in a low voice, without looking me directly in the eye, she apologized once more. She told me that things with her husband were not good, that he had lost his job, that they were thinking of selling the house because they could no longer afford it. And then there, with the folder on the table, I told her about the lawyer. I told her that I now had more than I needed to live comfortably, but that I hadn't come to show off or to throw anything in her face. I had only come to close the chapter. I told her that I forgave her from the heart, that I held no grudge, but that we each had to go our own way. She cried again, yes, but this time it was different. It wasn't just guilt, it was understanding, it was acceptance. And I, seeing that, knew that I had done the right thing. Because in the end, son, you can't carry resentments your whole life. You have to learn to let go, to move on, to keep only the good things you experienced. When I left the house, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange. I walked slowly with the calm pace of someone who has no unfinished business. I returned to the town that same night, and when I got to my little cottage, I turned on the radio, made myself a hot coffee, and sat down to write in my notebook. I wrote, "Today I closed the circle. Today I understood that it's not about keeping what you're owed, but what you give from the heart. I'll tell you, son, after that last visit to Megan's house, my life went back to that same quiet rhythm. I won't lie. Even though I had closed the chapter with my daughter, every now and then, on those long nights when the silence feels a bit heavier, I'd remember when we were a close family, when Sundays were for barbecues, and everyone laughed without a care in the world. But I learned that there are memories you have to keep in a corner of your heart, without letting them keep you up at night. Because like I told you before, pride doesn't feed anyone, but dignity gives you a reason to get up every morning with your head held high." The days passed, and I settled back into my routine in the town. The neighbors now knew me as Mr. Ernest, the retired mechanic. And even though I didn't fix cars like I used to, there was always someone asking for help to change a light bulb, check a leaky faucet. Small things, and I didn't mind. It kept me active, my hands busy, and my heart too. Because even when you have your own space and your peace, you always need to feel that you're still useful for something. One of those mornings when the sun was just beginning to peek out, I was sweeping the front of the house when Mrs. Bertha, a widowed neighbor who lived 2 streets up, approached. She greeted me with her soft voice and told me that the town center was looking for people to organize a community event. A fair of old trades where they wanted to show the young people how things were done before, without so many machines, without so much rush. And she asked if I would be up for participating, maybe teaching a little about mechanics or simply telling my stories. At first I hesitated. Believe me, you think you're past the age for that sort of thing. But later, as I sat with my coffee, I thought it over. Why not, if what I've lived through can be of any use, let it be to teach others? So I signed up. And that's where another stage of my life began, son. The following weeks, I spent my time preparing some old tools, cleaning rusty parts I had kept in a drawer for years. The kids from town, some who were just out of school, would come over curious to watch me work in the yard. And little by little, without realizing it, a small group of young people formed who would come every afternoon to learn to listen to me tell them how things were in my time. I taught them everything from how to loosen a bolt without breaking it to how to fix a bicycle without expensive spare parts. And let me tell you, there was something beautiful in that. To feel that even though I couldn't run like I used to, even though my legs ached a bit more at the end of the day, I could still plant a seed in someone. Sometimes between one lesson and another, I would also tell them my story. Not all of it, of course, but I would tell them never depend entirely on anyone, kids. Always keep something for yourselves, even if it's just a small saving, a little corner of your own where no one can kick you out. The event took place on a Sunday. The town square was filled with tables, colorful awnings, and soft music. I had my assigned spot with a small sign that said, "Traditional Mechanics, Mr. Ernest." And it was nice, son, to see people pass by, look, ask questions. Even some parents brought their little children to listen to me talk. I felt useful again, with that warmth in my chest that you only feel when you know you're doing something good. And it was in the middle of that fair, when I least expected it, that Megan appeared again. She arrived suddenly in simple clothes without makeup, as if trying to go unnoticed. I saw her in the crowd, standing to one side watching me in silence. She didn't approach right away. She stayed there watching me explain to the kids how an old tire works. Inside I felt a pang, of course, but I didn't interrupt what I was doing. I finished speaking, finished showing what I had to show, and only then did I walk over to her. We stood face to face for a moment, without saying anything, and it was she who broke the silence, lowering her head, as she always did when she wanted to say something important. "Dad, I came because I wanted to see you, because I miss you, and because I wanted you to know that I'm starting over." She explained that she had decided to separate from her husband, that she was looking for a job, that she wanted to do things right for herself. And their son is, when I understood, that life's twists and turns are no coincidence. Sometimes you have to lose everything to learn how to get back up. I didn't say much to her. I just hugged her for the first time in a long time. A real hug. The kind that squeezes your heart and cleanses your soul a little. We didn't talk about bank accounts or houses or anything material. Only about what was important, that we were there, both of us healthy, alive with a new chance to be a family again. Even if in a different way, with different rules. That night, back in my house, I sat down to write in my notebook again. And I wrote down something that I want you who are listening to me to remember too. You can lose everything in life. Money, your house, your job. But as long as you keep the ability to forgive, to get up, and to teach something to those who come after you, you're still winning. I'm telling you, son, after that hug with Megan at the fair, something inside me settled in a way I can't quite explain with words. It wasn't that everything was resolved overnight, or that the past was erased as if nothing had happened. No. The scars, like furrows in the earth after a heavy rain, they remain. But at least my heart was a little more at rest, as if a weight I had been carrying for too long had finally been lifted. I returned to my house that afternoon, with a lighter step, greeting my neighbors with a smile that hadn't come out in years, one of those smiles that appear on their own without forcing them. The following days were quiet, but with a different air about them. Megan called me a couple of times just to say hello, to tell me some small thing about her day. It wasn't like before, when we spoke out of obligation, or because something needed to be resolved. Now they were simple calls from a father and a daughter, as it should have always been. And every time I heard her voice, realized that maybe I had done the right thing by not staying silent, by taking my own path in time. Because if I had stayed there in her house enduring the disrespect, perhaps none of this would have happened. Sometimes, son, you have to walk away for people to value you. One morning as the May warmth was just beginning, I went out to the patio to water the plants I had been growing around the house. Simple little plants, some bougainvillea, some cacti, a couple of pots with rosemary and basil. Things that reminded me of my wife, who always said that a house without plants is like a heart without memories. As I was watering, I saw Mr. Peterson from the hardware store coming up the dirt path with a package in his hands. When he arrived, he greeted me hat in hand and gave me a letter. A letter like that, handwritten with my full name on the envelope. Hardly anyone sends letters these days, son. But there it was with the tight, trembling handwriting that I recognized immediately. It was from Megan. I sat on the porch with the sun gently warming my face, and I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 2 pages written on both sides, and as I read, my heart beat slowly, as if each word were a drop falling into a pond. Megan told me things she had never told me before, that as a child I had been her role model, that she had always admired my hard work, my ability to keep going no matter what. That as an adult, she had gotten carried away by pressures, by what people would say, by her husband, by the fear of not being able to handle it all. And that now, after having lost many things, she had understood that true value wasn't in what you have, but in what you are able to give, to teach, to hold up with your own 2 hands. At the end of the letter, there was a sentence that stuck with me, and I'll repeat it to you now because I think it might be useful to you who are listening. Dad, thank you for teaching me that even the silence of a dignified man says more than 1,000 words from an empty one. I put the letter in the notebook where I wrote my thoughts, and that night, as the radio played softly, I felt that the moment had finally come to close that story in my heart. Over time, Megan got a job in a small shop downtown. Sometimes she would send me messages telling me she was doing well, that she was taking it one step at a time. We never talked about money again, or secret accounts, or houses sold. That didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that we had learned to see each other in a different way, not as a burden, not as an obligation, but as a real family. And so the months went by, son. Between Mr. Peterson's workshop, the plants, the kids from town who came to learn about mechanics and about life, I kept writing in my notebook every so often, jotting down reflections, stray phrases. And if I ever felt that pang of sadness again for what happened, I just had to open the window. Look at the mountains in the distance and remind myself that not all roads lead to the same place, but they all teach you something. I'll tell you, son, after those quiet months, when you get used to that simple peace of a small town, I thought there would be no more surprises in my life. That what I was meant to live had been lived, that what I was meant to learn had been learned. But you're always mistaken when you think the road has ended, because just when you let your guard down, a little life throws another test at you. Not to make you fall, but to remind you that as long as you're breathing, there's always something more to face, something more to decide. One morning I was fixing an old bicycle that the town kids had brought me when I received a call from an unknown number. I don't usually answer those numbers, but for some reason I did that time. And it was that lawyer, the same one who had visited me months ago. His voice sounded serious, a bit rushed. He told me he needed to speak with me in person, that a matter had come up related to the property, the one they had compensated me for a while back. I didn't want to ask too much over the phone, so we agreed to meet in the city the next day. I barely slept that night, not because I was worried about the money. I was already clear that wasn't the important thing, but because whenever a lawyer shows up out of the blue, you start to wonder what kind of trouble could be coming now. The next day early, I put on my usual gray jacket, the same one I had worn the day I left Megan's house, and I took the first bus to the city. We met in a small coffee shop near the bank. The lawyer explained with that deliberate voice used by those who know they are delivering important news that upon reviewing the papers for the land sale they had discovered an error. It turns out that part of the sold land not only included the plot registered in my name, but also an additional portion that I had not declared and which by law now belonged to me. I didn't really understand at first, but what I did understand clearly was the amount he mentioned. It was much more than what I had already received, an amount that for someone like me used to living with just enough seemed like something out of a movie. I told him I didn't need that much, that I was fine as I was, but he insisted it was a legal process, that the money had to be delivered, because that's what the papers stipulated. And while he talked, I thought about Megan, about what that could mean for her children, for rebuilding her life. That night back in town, I sat on the porch for a long time with the radio off, just with the open notebook in front of me, thinking, what should I do with all of this? Could I keep it? Of course, live peacefully until the end of my days without a worry in the world. But I could also do something more, something that would really be worthwhile. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because when you've lived so much, you understand that in the end, the only thing that remains are the good things you leave behind. That's how I made a decision. I went to see Mr. Peterson the next day, and I told him everything. I told him I wanted to invest part of that money in the town, help build a real workshop where the kids could learn a trade, where they wouldn't have to go to the city to seek their fortune without even knowing how to use a wrench. Mr. Peterson, a man of few words, just looked at me with those serious eyes of his and said, "Mr. Ernest, what you want to do is not something just anyone would do." And so another chapter of my life began, son. One I didn't expect, but that filled me with a different kind of joy. Not a loud joy of laughter and parties, but that serene joy of knowing you're doing the right thing even if no one sees it, even if no one applauds. I'll tell you, son, building that community workshop wasn't a one-day affair. It wasn't just a matter of handing over the money and being done with it. I wanted to do things right, calmly, with my feet on the ground, just as I was taught when I was young. I personally went to find a place that was well located in town near the square where the kids could walk to. An old warehouse abandoned for years was the place I chose. The walls were dirty, the roof was leaky, but that didn't scare me. I always said that what's important isn't how you start, but how you fix things up over time. And there, with my own hands and the help of Mr. Peterson and some neighbors, we began to clean, to paint, to put everything in its place. Weeks went by, filled with paint, nails, wood, and the laughter of the young people who offered to help. The same ones who used to come to my house to learn a little about mechanics were now there, putting their hearts into the workshop that would soon belong to everyone. I went every day from sunup to sundown, even though my body didn't respond like it used to. My knees ached, my back complained after so many hours on my feet. But I didn't care, because every time I saw those kids with sweat on their faces, but happy, I knew the effort was worth it. One afternoon, while we were installing the last tool shelves, I felt someone peeking through the door. It was Megan. This time she wasn't alone. She was holding my 2 grandchildren by the hand, the children I had hardly seen in recent years. The 3 of them looked at the workshop with curiosity and with some respect, too. She approached slowly with that humble look you only see when someone comes with an open heart. She didn't say much, just a simple, "Dad, I wanted them to see what you're doing." I didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at them, the hammer still in my hand. But inside, son, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That clean, quiet pride of knowing that after everything I've lived through, I can still be an example. Not of pretty words or empty promises, but of actions. Megan helped me organize things that day. The children, curious, touched some of the wrenches, asking what each one was for. And so, between simple explanations and shy laughter, we spent the afternoon until the sun began to set behind the hills. That night, back at my house, I sat on the porch with my notebook open. I wrote something that had been turning over in my head all day. Second chances don't always come as we imagine them. Sometimes they arrive with dust on your hands, sweat on your brow, and a hug that took years to get here. And as I closed the notebook looking at the starry sky, I understood that this whole journey with its sorrows and joys had been worth it just for that moment. I'll tell you, son, when that workshop was finally up and running with its doors open and the young people of the town coming and going, I thought I had done what I was meant to do in this life. You reach a certain age where you think there's nothing left to expect. I would get up early, put the coffee on, sweep, the patio walk to the workshop, and spend the day there teaching what I knew, watching how the kids worked hard to learn. And in the afternoons, I'd walk slowly back home with a calm pace, greeting the neighbors, knowing that the day had been worthwhile. I thought everything was in its place, as if life had finally given me a break after so many years of struggle. But it was right at that moment, when I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, that life showed me there's always something pending, something you didn't see coming. One ordinary afternoon, the kind where the heat is intense and the air seems to stand still. I was sitting on my porch when I heard the engine of a car approaching on the dirt road. At first I didn't pay it much mind because it was common for people from town to come looking for me, for a workshop question, or just to say hello. But when the car stopped in front of my gate, I felt something in my chest, like one of those premonitions you don't know where they come from, but they feel just like a gentle tap. It was Megan again, but she wasn't alone. This time she was with an older woman with short hair dressed simply. Getting out of the car, Megan stood there looking at the house as if she hesitated to approach. The woman with her took her arm gently and was the one who spoke first. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ernest," she said in a calm voice. "My name is Clara. I'm a family therapist. Megan asked me to come with her." Hearing those words, I didn't know what to think. I stood up slowly, leaning on the doorframe, and invited them in. We sat at the usual table with the blue and white checkered tablecloth, the same one my dear Lucy, may she rest in peace, had put there. And there, as the sun streamed through the window, Megan began to speak this time, not with tears, not with nerves. Her voice sounded different, more serene, as if she had finally found the courage she had lacked before. "Dad," she said, "I've come to ask you something that isn't easy for me, but I need you to hear it." And so word for word she told me she had been going to therapy. That after everything that had happened, after throwing me out of her house, after separating from her husband, she had decided to seek help to understand why she had acted that way, why she had said such harsh things. And there, the three of us sitting together, she explained something that left me silent for a good while. That for years she had lived feeling like she had to carry everything, that she couldn't show weakness, that pride had won over affection, that she had learned as a child to keep things to herself, to bottle up her pain. And that's why the day she kicked me out of the house, it wasn't because she didn't love me, but because she didn't know how to handle the weight of her own life. I'll tell you, son, hearing that was like taking a stone off my chest. Not because it justified what she had done, but because at least now I understood where it came from. Sometimes you're left with an open wound, without even knowing how the cut was made. And that afternoon, listening to her, I felt that the wound was finally beginning to close. The therapist, Clara, intervened only occasionally, guiding the conversation, helping us put into words things we had perhaps never said out loud. She asked me how I had felt all this time, what it had been like for me to start over alone. And I, without shame, told her everything from the moment I walked out that door with my gray jacket to the first night in the small townhouse, sleeping on the cot with the leaky roof. I told her it had been hard, yes, but it had also been necessary, because sometimes you need to lose everything to realize what really matters. When we finished talking, the sun was already setting. Clara said goodbye with a calm smile, leaving Megan with me a little longer. We stayed in silence, watching the sky paint itself orange and red just like so many other afternoons. And it was then that Megan, in a quiet voice, almost a whisper, asked me something I had never expected to hear. "Dad, do you think one day we could be a real family again? Not like before, in a different way, but together." "I'll be honest, son." I stared at the horizon for a good while before answering, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't a yes or a no, it was something deeper. And when I finally spoke, I did so with the calm that one only learns with age. "Megan, we don't have to go back to what we were. What's important is that now we know who we really are, that we understand each other, that there's no resentment. Family isn't about being under the same roof. It's knowing that even if we each walk our own path, there's always a place for the other in our hearts." She nodded, her eyes shining, but without tears this time. And before she left, she hugged me slowly, tightly, one of those hugs I never expected to receive at this stage of my life. That night, son, as I wrote in my notebook by lamplight, I jotted down something I want you to remember. Forgiveness isn't about going back. It's about opening a new door beyond what was broken. I'll tell you, son, after that afternoon, when Megan said goodbye with that different kind of hug, I felt a peace inside me that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace of someone who has everything figured out, nor the peace of someone who expects nothing more from life. It was something simpler. The peace of knowing that even though things didn't turn out as you dreamed, they were done right. That the heart wasn't left full of grudges or unspoken words. I kept getting up early every morning, just like always, making my coffee, calmly sweeping the patio, watering the plants. The difference was that now, at some point during the day, a message would arrive from Megan or my grandchildren, asking how I was, telling me some little thing. Something simple. What had they cooked? Had it rained on their side? Was the workshop still open? And with that sun, with those simple things, I felt complete. The workshop was still doing well with the young people of the town, coming and going, learning not only how to use tools, but also to respect work, to value their own effort. Many of them would come at the end of the day to tell me how they did in school or if they had managed to fix something at home, thanks to what they learned there. And I, sitting on my wooden bench with my hands now a bit slower, but my heart always attentive, listened to each story with the same interest I had listened to my clients when I had my real workshop in my younger years. Because, son, even when you're no longer lifting engines or hoisting cars, you're still useful as long as you have something to teach, even if it's just how to listen. One afternoon, a young man I didn't know came to the workshop. He came from another town, had heard about the place from a relative, and wanted to learn. At first, I noticed he was shy, quiet, but it only took a couple of lessons for him to start opening up. His name was Evan, and over time I learned that he had been through some tough times, that he had no close family, that he had been on his own since he was very young. And I'll tell you something, son, when you've been through so much, you get a trained eye for recognizing that same emptiness in others. So little by little I gave him more confidence, teaching him not only how to fix things, but also how to walk straight in life as one should. And with that I understood that the workshop wasn't just a place for tools, it was a refuge, a school of life for many who, like me, needed a second start. The months passed, the seasons changed, and the day came when the town organized a community festival in the square. One of those big fairs with food stalls, live music games for the kids. They invited me, of course, to represent the workshop, to go up on stage and say a few words. At first I hesitated because I've never been a man for microphones or speaking to crowds, but the young guys insisted. And so it was that one Sunday afternoon with the sun setting gently. I found myself in front of a crowd of neighbors with a microphone in my hand and my heart beating like when you're young and facing something for the first time. I didn't prepare a speech, I just spoke from the heart. I told them without giving details that years ago I had gone through a difficult time, that I had lost important things, that I had even felt it wasn't worth going on. But thanks to the opportunity to start over, and thanks to the town that welcomed me with open arms, I had found a reason again to get up every day. And as I spoke, son, I looked up and saw Megan in the crowd, with my grandchildren by her side, smiling. Not clapping loudly, but with that silent smile you only give to someone you truly love. When I got off the stage, many came up to shake my hand, to congratulate me, and I, with my usual humility, just replied that I hadn't done anything extraordinary, that I had only done what any dignified man should do: keep standing, even when the wind blows against you. That night back at home, I opened for the last time the notebook, where I had written all my reflections since the day I left Megan's house. And there, with the radio playing softly, I wrote the final lines. Today I close this notebook, but not because the story is over. I close it because I learned that the real story isn't written on paper, but in the hearts of those who remember you with respect and affection. And that, son, is what I want you to remember. That it doesn't matter how many times life knocks you down, nor how many times they tell you you're a burden, that you're no longer useful. As long as you breathe, as long as you have the strength to get up, there is always a door waiting to be opened, a heart waiting to be healed, a story waiting to be told. So if you've made it this far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me. And I also want to thank the channel Coffee with Bobo for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. And to help this channel, subscribe here and share this video, because every day there is a new story. And who knows, one of them might be similar to yours too.